How did a woman I loved, a woman I shared my bed and my dreams with, turn our home into a literal prison while I was thousands of miles away supposedly building our future? This is a journey into the dark heart of a marriage built on a foundation of ice. And today, I'm pulling back the curtain on every single lie. To truly understand that moment in the garage, you have to understand the Sarah I thought I married. 5 years ago, she was my anchor, while I was struggling to build my brand and exploring the world of automated storytelling. She was the one who managed the spreadsheets, kept the books, and pushed me to take my content international. I mistook her coldness for efficiency. I mistook her total lack of empathy for a necessary professional drive. When my mother's health began to fail 6 months ago, Sarah didn't hesitate. She was the first to suggest that Gloria move in with us. She told me to focus on my career, the millions of views, and the business expansion while she handled the burden of daily care. I felt a debt of gratitude I thought I could never repay. I gave her full, unfettered access to our joint accounts. I signed every legal paper she put in front of me without a second thought. I was a fool, too blinded by my own ambition and viral titles to notice the slow, agonizing death of my own mother's dignity right under my roof. As my business trips grew longer and more frequent, the updates from Sarah became a script of their own, carefully crafted to keep me at a distance. She was a master of the vague update, always telling me that Mom was having a rough day or was becoming increasingly aggressive due to her cognitive decline. She painted a picture of a woman who was becoming a danger to herself and others. In reality, I was sitting in airport lounges and corporate boardrooms, sending thousands of dollars home every month for specialized care and private nursing that never actually existed. Sarah was using that money to fund a luxury lifestyle, the cars, the designer clothes, the motorcycle, while my mother was being stripped of her humanity. Every time I tried to FaceTime, Sarah had a convenient excuse. Mom was napping, she had just finished a difficult therapy session, or she had dropped her phone again and it was broken. I didn't push. I didn't fly home to check. I was too busy being a provider. That is the guilt I will carry for the rest of my life. The flight back from the Seattle conference was a last-minute decision, spurred by a strange feeling in my gut that I couldn't ignore. I landed at 11:30 p.m., taking a quiet cab home, wanting nothing more than to surprise my family and finally get some rest. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the atmosphere of the house hit me like a physical blow. It felt sterile. It felt empty. My mother's room, which was once filled with her old books, family photos, and the constant scent of lavender, was stripped bare. It had been turned into a minimalist showroom for the house Sarah wanted, not the home we actually shared. Panic began to claw at my throat. I checked the kitchen, the guest rooms, and the backyard, finding no trace of her. Then I remembered my spare car keys were usually kept on a hook in the garage. I hit the wall button. The motor hummed, a sound that usually meant I was heading out for a drive in a car I worked hard for. But as the door rose, the smell hit me first, the sharp, unmistakable scent of dampness, motor oil, and unwashed skin. I whispered her name, my voice cracking, and a small, broken sound came from the shadows in the corner. "David, is that you, baby?" My heart shattered into a million pieces. I saw her. Gloria was sitting on that thin mattress, clutching a tattered blanket, with nothing but a single bottle of lukewarm water and a plate of cold, congealed rice to her name. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the 3 weeks I was gone. Her hair was matted, her skin was pale, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Then, the light from the kitchen door clicked on with a sharp snap. Sarah stepped into the garage, perfectly dressed even at midnight, looking as if she had been waiting for this exact confrontation to happen. "What is this?" I asked. My voice wasn't even mine. It was a low, dangerous growl of pure, visceral horror. Sarah didn't move. She didn't rush over to help my mother up or offer a frantic explanation. She simply crossed her arms, just as you see in the thumbnail, and began to tap her foot with an air of immense boredom. She looked me in the eye and claimed that Mom was wandering and making messes in the house she had worked so hard to decorate and maintain. She had the audacity to call this a storage solution. She said it was for our sanity, arguing that she was the one, dealing with the grueling reality of a dying woman while I was off playing CEO and enjoying the perks of my success. She spoke about my mother as if she were a broken appliance that was leaking. Oil on her expensive floors. I looked at my mother, who was trying to hide her face in that ragged blanket. She was ashamed. A woman who had worked 3 jobs, who had sacrificed her youth to make sure I had an education and a future, was now ashamed to be seen like this by her own son. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. I told Sarah to get her inside immediately, but Sarah just laughed. It was a dry, chilling sound that echoed off the garage walls. She then threatened me with the very power of attorney I had foolishly signed months ago. She told me that if I made a scene, or if I tried to involve the authorities, she would use her legal standing to have my mother committed to a state-run psychiatric ward. She showed me a folder on her phone, notes she had taken, photos of messes she had likely staged, and recordings of my mother in moments of high distress. She was ready to prove to the world that I was an absentee, neglectful son, and she was a struggling, saint-like wife who had been pushed to the edge. I knelt on that cold, oil-stained concrete and held my mother tightly, ignoring the smell and the dirt. I whispered into her ear, promising her that I was home now and that I was never, ever leaving her side again. I felt her small, frail frame relax against me, her tears soaking into my dress shirt. But as I looked up at Sarah, I saw that she was recording the entire interaction on her phone, likely to use it as further evidence of my supposed instability. She told me to stay there and see how easy the job was, mocking my protectiveness. She threatened to call the hospital the very second I stepped out of line or tried to challenge her authority over the household. The trap was perfectly set, and my marriage had officially become a crime scene. Sarah believed she had won because she had the paperwork and the keys, but what she didn't realize was that the man who built an international business from nothing wasn't about to be bullied in his own home. I was done being a fool. The war for my mother's life and my own soul was only beginning, and I was going to make sure Sarah lost everything. I spent the next 48 hours living in a state of suspended animation, moving through the rooms of my own home like a ghost haunted by the living. After the confrontation in the garage, I had managed to physically carry my mother, Gloria, back into the guest room. Despite Sarah's hissed threats and her frantic tapping on her phone screen, the air in the house was thick with a toxicity that made every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. Sarah didn't apologize. She didn't offer to help me change my mother's clothes or bring her a warm meal. Instead, she retreated into her home office, the room I had, custom built for her with the finest mahogany and soundproofing, and locked the door. I could hear her muffled voice through the wood, speaking in a low, urgent tone to someone on the other end of the line. I didn't know then that she was already laying the groundwork for my destruction, painting me as a volatile, unstable husband who had returned from a work trip and suffered a mental breakdown. She was weaponizing my absence, using the very career I had built to provide for us as the primary evidence of my neglect. Standing in the hallway, listening to the silence of a house that used to feel like a sanctuary, I realized that the woman I married was a masterpiece of deception. I looked at the walls, adorned with expensive art pieces I had bought to celebrate our anniversaries, and all I could see were the bars of a cage. Sarah had spent years curating an image of the perfect, supportive partner while she was secretly dismantling the life of the woman who raised me. I went into the guest room and sat by my mother's bed. She was sleeping fitfully, her small, frail hands clutching the duvet, as if she expected someone to rip it away at any moment. Every time the floorboards creaked, she would flinch in her sleep. The psychological damage Sarah had inflicted was far deeper than the physical cold of the garage. It was a shattering of safety, a betrayal of the most sacred bond of family. I realized then that Sarah wasn't just a stressed caregiver. She was a predator who had found a vulnerable target in my mother and a distracted provider in me. The next morning, the gaslighting reached a fever pitch. I walked into the kitchen to find Sarah making coffee, looking as composed and professional, as if the previous night's horror had never happened. She turned to me with a small, patronizing smile and handed me a mug. "David, I know you were emotional last night," she began, her voice dripping with a fake, practiced empathy. "Travel does that to you? The stress of the international market, the pressure of the Luneth Tales growth, it's clearly taking a toll on your grip on reality." I stared at her, the coffee turning cold in my hand. She went on to explain, with terrifying calmness, that my mother had demanded to stay in the garage because she felt trapped by the indoor walls. She claimed she had photos of Gloria smiling in the garage, videos of her saying she liked the quiet out there. It was a narrative so absurd, so blatantly false, that I felt a surge of vertigo. Sarah was rewriting history in real time, confident that her documentation and her polished delivery would outweigh the raw, bleeding truth I had seen with my own eyes. "You're sick, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You took her money. You took her dignity. And you expect me to believe she chose to sleep on concrete next to your motorcycle?" Sarah's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned into chips of black flint. She pulled out her tablet and slid a document across the marble countertop. It was a series of bank statements from an account I didn't recognize, an account in Sarah's name only, but funded by a steady stream of transfers from my mother's retirement fund and our joint business account. The dates coincided exactly with my longest trips abroad. While I was in Dubai or London, closing deals and filming narrative content, Sarah was draining the lifeblood of our family's future to pay off secret debts and fund her own private collections. She hadn't just been hiding my mother, she had been hiding an entire secret life. The folder she had mentioned the night before wasn't just a few notes. It was a systematic dossier. She had recorded every instance where my mother, in her confusion, had raised her voice or forgotten a name. She had edited these clips to make a gentle, elderly woman look like a violent, unhinged threat to the household. "If you try to take me to court, David, this is what the judge sees," she said, tapping the screen. "They see a loving wife who was forced to take extreme measures to protect her home from a woman who was losing her mind. And they see a husband who was never there to help, who was too busy chasing viral fame to notice his own mother's decline. Who do you think the system is going to protect? I have the signatures. I have the medical reports. I have the power." She was right about one thing. She had been incredibly thorough in her malice. I felt a cold, calculated rage begin to replace the initial shock. Sarah believed that because I was a creative, I lacked the stomach for a real fight. She thought my focus on storytelling meant I couldn't handle the gritty, ugly reality of a legal war. But she forgot that storytelling is about structure, about finding the hidden threads that connect a narrative and pulling them until the whole thing unravels. I realized I couldn't just kick her out. She had protected herself legally too well for a simple eviction. I needed to play her game, but with a much higher stake. I needed to become the very thing. She was trying to portray me as distracted and overwhelmed, while I secretly began to build a counter-dossier that would leave her with nothing. I had to go back into the lion's den of our marriage and pretend that her gaslighting was working. For the next 24 hours, I performed the role of the defeated husband. I let her talk. I let her tell me how difficult it was for her. I even apologized for my outburst in the garage. I watched her relax, her predatory instincts temporarily satiated by my apparent submission. She went back to her motorcycle, back to her designer shopping, confident that she had successfully neutralized the threat I posed. But while she was out celebrating her victory with my mother's stolen money, I was in the garage myself, not looking for keys, but looking for the physical evidence she had overlooked. I found the hidden cameras she had installed to monitor my mother, cameras she thought only she could access. I found the discarded pill bottles of a heavy sedative that my mother had never been prescribed, but which Sarah was clearly using to keep her quiet and compliant. During the day, the betrayal deepened with every discovery. This wasn't just about money or space. It was about a total sociopathic need for control. Sarah wanted a life of luxury and status, and she viewed my mother as an obstacle to be managed and eventually discarded. She had turned our home into a laboratory of cruelty, testing how much she could get away with before someone noticed. The Ferrari in the garage, the motorcycle, the art on the walls, they were all trophies of her successful manipulation. She thought she was the director of this story, and I was just an actor following her script. But as I sat on that same stained mattress where I had found my mother, holding the hidden camera in my hand, I knew the finale was going to be something she never saw coming. I realized that to save my mother and reclaim my life, I would have to be as ruthless as Sarah had been. I would have to use every resource at my disposal, my business contacts, my legal team, and the very technology I used to create viral content to expose her. The image from the thumbnail wasn't just a moment of shock. It was the starting gun for a race to the finish line. Sarah had the head start, the paperwork, and the lack of a conscience. But I had the truth, and I had a son's love for a mother who had given him everything. As part 2 comes to a close, the stage is set for a confrontation that will move beyond the garage and into the light of day. Sarah thinks she has me trapped in her storage solution, but she's about to find out that when you push a man to the edge, the only place left for him to go is through you. The war has officially begun, and I won't stop until every lie she told is burned to the ground. The third act of this nightmare began not with a scream, but with the chilling, mechanical silence of a digital recovery. While Sarah believed I was back under her thumb, performing the role of the broken, submissive husband, I was actually deep in the digital trenches. I spent the late hours of the night in my home studio, the very place where I usually craft the narratives for Lunith Tales. But this time, the story was real and the stakes were life and death. Using my expertise in video and audio processing, I bypassed the security on our shared home iPad that Sarah had clumsily hidden in the back of the linen closet. She thought she had deleted her tracks, but in the world of digital footprints, nothing is ever truly gone. What I found on that device made the incident in the garage look like a minor misunderstanding. There were hours of voice memos, recorded by Sarah herself, used as a sort of twisted training log for how to break my mother's spirit. The audio was crisp, clear, and utterly devastating. I sat there with my headphones on, the blue light of the monitor, reflecting off my tears as I heard my wife's voice, a voice I once found soothing, turn into a weapon of psychological torture. "No, Gloria, you are not listening," I heard her hiss in one recording. "No one is coming for you. David is busy. He's happy I'm managing this. He doesn't want to see you like this." The cruelty in her tone was systematic. She wasn't just being mean. She was gaslighting an elderly woman into believing her own son had abandoned her. She was stripping away my mother's last remaining tether to reality, all while I was thousands of miles away, working to pay for the very roof Sarah was using as a cage. Every outburst Sarah had documented was revealed in these tapes to be a desperate, terrified reaction to her own provocations. She would poke, prod, and insult my mother until Gloria cried out in frustration, and then Sarah would hit record to capture only the reaction. It was a masterpiece of manufactured evidence. As the sun began to rise on the third day of this undercover war, I discovered the financial depth of the betrayal. Sarah hadn't just been managing our accounts. She had been cannibalizing them. I found digital receipts for luxury, purchases that had never entered our home, jewelry hidden in a safety deposit box, offshore accounts, and even a down payment on a property in her name only, located 3 states away. She was planning her exit strategy, using my mother's Social Security and my business revenue as her personal golden parachute. The Ferrari in the garage and the motorcycle weren't just toys. They were assets she intended to flip once she had successfully committed my mother and divorced me for mental instability. She had turned my entire life's work into a bank account for her future life without me. The realization was a cold, sharp blade in my gut. I wasn't just a husband. I was an unsuspecting investor in my own ruin. The most horrifying discovery, however, was the medical file. Sarah had been forging signatures on caregiver logs, pretending that a professional nursing service was visiting the house while I was away. She had even gone so far as to create fake email threads with a non-existent doctor to prove to me that Mom's decline was irreversible and required institutionalization. She was creating a paper trail that would stand up in any court, painting a picture of a devoted wife pushed to the brink by a senile mother-in-law and an absent husband. I looked at the image of us in the garage, the one from the thumbnail, and realized that Sarah's crossed arms weren't just a sign of defiance. They were a sign of victory. She truly believed she had won. She believed that her wall of lies was too high for me to climb. But she forgot that I am a storyteller. I know how to find the hole in the plot. I spent the afternoon of part 3 visiting my mother in her room, pretending for Sarah's cameras that everything was normal. I brought her tea and spoken aloud, cheerful voice about my upcoming trips, playing the role of the distracted businessman perfectly. But beneath the table I was holding my mother's hand, squeezing it in a code we had used when I was a child. 1 squeeze for I love you, 2 for I'm here. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, a tiny spark of the woman who had raised me, peeking through the fog of the sedatives Sarah had been slipping into her food. For a brief second, the fear in her eyes vanished, replaced by a fierce maternal trust. She knew I was fighting for her. That moment gave me the strength to go back into the kitchen and face the monster who was wearing my wife's face. Dinner that night was a masterclass in tension. Sarah sat across from me, sipping wine and talking about next steps for Gloria's care. She suggested a facility she had researched, a place 4 hours away where visits were strictly regulated. "It's for the best, David," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "You can't keep living like this. Your business will suffer. Your brand will decline. Let the professionals handle it." I nodded, forced to smile, and agreed. I told her I would sign the commitment papers the following morning. I watched the triumph flare in her eyes, a predatory gleam that she couldn't quite hide. She thought the game was over. She thought she had finally cleared the obstacle and secured her fortune. She even suggested we go out for an expensive dinner the next night to celebrate our new beginning. But while she was dreaming of her new life, I was sending the recovered audio files and bank statements to a team of 3, different attorneys and a private investigator specializing in elder abuse. I wasn't just looking for a divorce. I was looking for an indictment. I spent the rest of the night setting up my own hidden cameras, devices Sarah wouldn't find because they were integrated into the very technology she thought she controlled. I mapped out every inch of the house, ensuring that the next time she laid a hand on my mother or uttered a threat, it would be captured in high definition from 3 different angles. I was no longer a victim of her narrative. I was the director of her downfall. The garage door was about to open one last time, but this time the light wouldn't reveal a victim. It would reveal a criminal. The final hours of Part 3 were spent in a state of cold, calculated preparation. I didn't sleep. I watched the clock, counting down the minutes until the legal orders I had requested would be processed. Every time I looked at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in our bed, I felt a wave of revulsion so strong it was physical. I wondered how many other people she had manipulated in her life, how many other storage solutions she had devised for people who got in her way. She was a ghost in my life, a hollow shell of the woman I thought I loved. The Sarah I knew never existed. She was just a character she played to get access to the stage, but the play was about to be canceled. As I walked out to the garage one last time that night, I stood in the spot where I had found my mother. I felt the cold concrete beneath my feet and remembered the smell of the dampness and the oil. I looked at the luxury cars and the expensive toys, and they felt like trash. They were nothing. They were the price Sarah had put on a human soul, and it was a price I was going to make her pay back tenfold. I checked the recordings one last time, ensuring the thumb drive was ready. I had the audio of her threats, the video of the garage, and the paper trail of the stolen money. Tomorrow the world would see the real Sarah. Tomorrow, the storage solution would be for her, not my mother. The war was no longer in the shadows. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, marking the start of Part 4, I knew there was no turning back. The finale was here, and I was going to make sure the ending was one the audience and Sarah would never forget. The final morning began with a silence that felt heavy, like the air before a massive storm breaks. I stood in the kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of coffee, watching the steam rise in the early morning light. To anyone watching, I looked like a man defeated, a husband ready to sign away his mother's freedom to save his own sanity. Sarah walked into the room, her silk robe trailing behind her, a look of smug satisfaction radiating from every pore. She didn't even try to hide her triumph anymore. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the marble island, sliding a thick stack of legal documents toward me. "The car will be here at noon, David," she said, her voice sounding like a melody of pure ice. "The facility is expecting her. Once you sign these commitment papers and the transfer of guardianship, we can finally put this storage issue behind us and get back to our real life." I looked at the papers, then at her, and for the first time in days, I let a genuine smile touch my lips. It wasn't the smile of a broken man. It was the smile of a hunter who had just felt the trap's teeth snap shut. "You're right, Sarah," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It is time to put the storage issue behind us." "But we aren't going to the facility. In fact, you're the only one who is going anywhere today." Her brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion breaking through her mask of confidence. "What are you talking about?" "Sign the papers?" "David, don't start this again." I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I reached for my laptop, which was already connected to the large screen in our living room. With a single click, I activated the playback. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of her own voice, the recordings from the iPad, the secret tapes of her mocking my mother, and the audio from the hidden cameras in the garage. Sarah's face went from a pale ivory to a sickly ashen gray in seconds. She lunged for the laptop, but I stepped in her way, my arm like a bar of iron. "Sit down!" "Sarah, the show is just beginning." For the next 20 minutes, I forced her to watch and listen to the highlights of her own cruelty. I showed her the bank statements with the highlighted transfers to her secret offshore accounts. I showed her the receipts for the luxury jewelry she had bought with my mother's retirement fund. I showed her the forged caregiver logs and the fake emails she had sent to keep me in the dark. As the evidence piled up, her defiance began to crumble, replaced by a desperate cornered panic. She tried to scream, to call me a liar, to claim the videos were AI-generated fakes, but I played the metadata on the screen, showing the timestamps and the IP addresses that traced back to her own devices. The narrative she had spent months crafting was being incinerated in the light of the truth. She was no longer the director. She was the lead suspect in a case of systematic elder abuse and massive financial fraud. Just as the recording of her threats in the garage reached its climax, there was a sharp, authoritative knock at the front door. Sarah froze, her eyes darting toward the entryway. "Who is that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "That would be the authorities." "Sarah," I replied, my tone devoid of any emotion. "And my legal team. And a social worker from the Department of Elder Affairs." I walked to the door and opened it, revealing 2 police officers and a woman in a professional suit holding a clipboard. Sarah tried to run toward the back door, but the officers were already inside. The look of absolute terror on her face as the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. The woman who thought she could treat my mother like storage was now being processed like a criminal in her own hallway. As the officers led a sobbing, hysterical Sarah out to the patrol car, the social worker and I went into the guest room. My mother was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide as she watched the commotion. I knelt by her side and took her hands. "It's over, Mom. She's gone. You're safe now." The social worker conducted a brief assessment, noting the bruises on my mother's arms and the signs of sedation. "You did the right thing, Mr. David," she said softly. Most people are too afraid to confront the person they love, even when they see the evidence. "You saved her life." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a son who had finally fulfilled his duty. I looked around the room Sarah had tried to strip of all warmth, and I knew that today was the day we would begin to fill it with life again. The reclamation of our home was a long and exhausting process. Over the next few hours, my legal team served Sarah's lawyers with the emergency protective order and the filing for an annulment based on fraud and criminal intent. Because of the evidence I had gathered, her power of attorney was immediately revoked, and a freeze was placed on all the accounts she had touched. The Ferrari and the motorcycle she had bought with stolen funds were slated for seizure and sale, with the proceeds going directly back into a trust for my mother's long-term care. Every trophy of Sarah's manipulation was being dismantled. I walked out to the garage one last time that afternoon. The light was different now. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the space where my mother had suffered. I took the thin mattress and the tattered blanket and threw them into a dumpster. The garage was just a garage again. That evening, the house was finally quiet. But it was a different kind of silence, a peaceful, healing quiet. I sat on the back porch with my mother watching the sunset. She was wrapped in a new, soft cashmere throw, sipping a cup of hot soup that a private, verified nurse had prepared for her. We didn't talk much, but the way she held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, told me everything I needed to know. She was no longer afraid of the dark corners of the house. She was no longer a secret to be hidden away. She was the matriarch of our family. Restored to her rightful place of honor and dignity, I looked at the Luneth Tales channel on my phone and saw a comment from a follower asking about my next big story. I smiled and put the phone away. The best story I had ever told wasn't for an audience of millions. It was the story of a son who refused to let his mother be forgotten. The final scene of this journey is one of resilience. Sarah is currently awaiting trial on multiple counts of elder abuse, grand theft, and forgery. Her exit strategy turned into a one-way ticket to a state penitentiary. As for me, I've shifted the focus of my content. I still do automated storytelling, but now I use my platform to raise awareness about elder care and the signs of psychological abuse. I've learned that viral success means nothing if you lose your soul in the process. My mother's health is slowly improving, her mind clearing as the effects of the sedatives fade. We are rebuilding our lives one day at a time in a house that finally